Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
Really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
Welcome. It is episode number 43 of Weather Weekly. I am your host, meteorologist Marcus Bailey out of Indianapolis, Indiana. Good to have you along here. There's going to be a short one here this week, but I know I've been kind of teasing ahead to this. We are in contact, though, with Mike Ryan, meteorologist from the National Weather Service. And we are going to do that interview here later on this week. So my hope is, as long as everything kind of works out scheduling-wise, by next Tuesday, we will have his winter forecast. We did it last year. It's such a good, not only it's always interesting to have the forecast, but Mike does such a great job of breaking down the whys. Why does he feel like it's going to go this way? And he kind of dives in deep to just not just the teleconnections. The La Nina is what the forecast is this year, but some of the other things that are going to kind of factor in as well, and kind of walks you through how he thinks the season's going to project. So we're hoping that's going to be next week, episode number 44 on Weather Weekly. I'm going to stick to local weather headlines because I'm going to spend some time on local or national headlines in the main body and kind of tie it into. We are in the time of the season here in the Midwest where we're already starting to see it ramp up with a lot of social media accounts throwing out a lot of snowfall amounts. I really wasn't going to spend some time on it, but I ran into a TikTok yesterday. I have an account. I don't do anything on it, but I just kind of peruse and saw a guy that's on there, and he's got a lot of likes and shares that is talking about snow that's, in James Spann always calls it voodoo land, right? It's 2 weeks out, and so I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant, but I'm gonna explain why. And hopefully you'll kind of understand a little bit about that. So anyway, local headlines. My goodness, what a mild weekend here across the state. I hit the golf links last Friday. Now, we're getting some big changes here. But I can't remember the last time I actually golfed in December. I'm sure there's been some opportunities. I never really got the chance, but I happened to have the day off. It fell on a day off, and that would have been December 3rd. And so I was able to actually go out and play 18 holes in temperatures that were in the mid-50s. It was ideal, and we actually made it to the low 60s on Sunday before we kind of brought in the change. Monday was... oh boy, it was ugly, right? We had the mild air in the morning, but quickly saw the temperatures drop, and it's been very cold and very blustery as well as we're kind of getting a return to winter. But lots of ups and downs in this forecast here, and it kind of comes with a host of everything in terms of what we're looking ahead toward for the week and beyond, which we'll talk about in the extended forecast at the end of the podcast. So that's kind of like the main headline locally was just the crazy temperature swing that we had just in a very short amount of time. Did bring some pretty wild wind gusts to open up the week on Monday. Starting to quiet things down, though, here for the second half of the week. We'll talk about that forecast coming up. We will talk more about some of the national headlines. There's some interesting things but it all ties in to kind of the theme that I want to talk about, and it is social media hype, especially this time of year in the Midwest, and what you need to look out for. That's coming up next here on Weather Weekly.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire. You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
All right, episode number 43 here. I'm not going to be on a whole long time here because this is kind of me getting on a soapbox a little bit, and I don't necessarily like doing that a lot, but I think there are some things that are warranted here. And I've done this before in previous podcasts, but because of us flipping the switch here, and it has become a bit more active across the Midwest in the pattern, I'm starting to see some themes on social media. And so I know a lot of you that listen, you guys are true weather geeks, and you may know better, but there's the general population that doesn't necessarily know better. And we live in a society where a lot of things get shared that may not necessarily be true, or it is overhyped. And look, I work for a news organization, and news can be blamed on this sometimes. You know, we live in a society now where clickbait is the norm because we want people to click back to an article, and it makes that company money because you are linking back to a website. So that's going to be kind of the general theme here. What I want to do is I want to kind of piggyback off of, before we hit the break, you know, some of the national headlines that were talked about that I noticed over the last week since the last time we talked here, and we did the December outlook in the last podcast. So one of them that was interesting was the cold in Alaska. It has been unusually cold. Now, look, we all know that Alaska can be extremely cold. It obviously is chilly, you know, during the winter months for the most part. But it was an unusual cold for the month of November for the entire state of Alaska, so much so that there were many reporting stations that reported their coldest November on record. For example, King Salmon, which is in the southern part of Alaska, it's not necessarily considered part of the Aleutian Islands, I don't think, but it kind of gets to that extension. It's with southern or southwestern Alaska. Their average temperature for the month of November was 4 degrees. 4 degrees, that's it. That was number one coldest. Cold Bay, which is part of that Aleutian Island chain, was at 27.7 degrees, which is also the first coldest. But you had other reporting stations. Bethel, which is in southwestern Alaska, 0.7 degrees Fahrenheit, second coldest. St. Paul, those of you that are familiar with Deadliest Catch, St. Paul is kind of a popular island. It's a stopping point for many of the fisheries there to be able to drop off their load. So that's kind of, it's just out in the middle of nowhere. It's not connected to the mainland there. 28.6 degrees Fahrenheit, that's fifth coldest. They'd obviously be a little bit warmer because they are out in the middle of the ocean, so that does offer a bit of a protecting mechanism, if you will. Nome, Alaska, which is in western Alaska, it's much farther north, kind of, you know, close to the extension where Russia kind of extends out, and it's close. 4.3, fourth coldest. I'm not going to pronounce this other city's name correctly, but it was minus 4.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that was the fourth coldest there in the northwestern portion of Alaska there. So you had several areas. But I also think it's interesting to note on December 4th, so that was over the weekend, December 4th was Saturday, numbers as of 4:30 in the morning, local time in Alaska, there were many areas that were not along the coast, so inland numbers, central and eastern Alaska, closer to the Canadian border, where the air temperatures were into the minus 30 to minus 40 range. In fact, the coldest that I'm looking at right now is minus 48. So it shows how cold that air is. Now, the concern is, and this will be something maybe we can bring up to Mike Ryan when we talk to him next week, is, you know, you usually will get that kind of cold air bottled up in Alaska and northwestern Canada, but eventually it does evacuate south. And sometimes we can tap into that. It's kind of what we say the lobe of the polar vortex. I know a buzzword, and I could go on a rant on that here coming up too. sometimes that kind of cold can evacuate. Now, I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. And you'll hear in the forecast coming up the after the break here at the end of the podcast that the long term for us over the next couple of weeks is much warmer than normal, which means this cold's going to be bottled up in Alaska and the Yukon. But eventually something's got to give, and that's going to end up releasing. So we'll see if we get some of that cold here. And what may end up amplifying that is there going to be snow on the ground from basically where that cold travels to our area. Because obviously that cold will modify if it's over a dry land. But if you've got snow, I think back to the brutal winter that we had back in the early 2010s when I was living in Peoria. And it just was cold blast after cold blast. It's really when we got the term polar vortex became kind of more well-known and popular. That the problem is we had so much snow on the ground from Alaska through the Midwest that cold air never had a chance to modify, never had a chance to warm up. So we'd get these shots of snow and then followed by an intense blast of cold that never really got a chance to warm up because it was rolling over frozen land, packed in with snow. And so we would get these brutal temperatures where we maybe even struggle to get to zero, and wind chills were into that 30 below range. So we'll see if that kind of plays out. There's a lot of factors in that. Again, that's one of the many questions that we'll ask Mike Ryan next week when he gives us his winter weather forecast. But that was one headline I thought was interesting, just the chill in Alaska. But what really kind of got me going, well, there's a couple of things. But what kind of got me going about the social media aspect and angle that I want to take in this podcast was, and my station was one that jumped on the board. It was a national story, but everybody jumped on it. That it was, a hurricane warning was issued in Hawaii. And again, my station was guilty of it, but many others are as well, that, there was no context in that headline. It ended up being very much clickbait. Because if you actually went on to read, and with some of the interviews on a lot of these national outlets, they said, this isn't rare. In fact, the one article I'm reading right now, it's off of AccuWeather. Blizzards are not totally uncommon in Hawaii. In fact, prior to this week, the National Weather Service had issued blizzard warnings for parts of Hawaii more recently than for much of the East Coast, including cities such as Philadelphia and New York. So you have to think about Hawaii. Those of you that have been there, it is a mountainous island, the Big Island specifically, where they had the blizzard warning. So where you are used to going in terms of a Hawaiian vacation, where you're wanting to stay on the warmth and the beaches and that, they don't get snow there. It's in the higher elevations where they're getting the snow, which should not be a shock to you. If you've been to Hawaii, I'm sure you've probably seen snow caps while you were there. That's where they were dealing with it. So I thought that was an interesting national story. They had to deal with blizzard warnings. So they had crazy winds. They had intense snow. We talked about the what the qualifications are for blizzards. It doesn't mean that you have to have a crazy amount of snow. It's just the low visibility, snowing at a certain rate, and you've got gusty winds, right? So that's what they had in the higher elevations of Hawaii. So people that lived in those higher elevations or had to travel through those higher elevations, that was dangerous. But if you were vacationing anywhere along the outskirts of the island where it's guarding the ocean, it was a beautiful, beautiful forecast over Hawaii. Well, they did deal with some rain, but it was much warmer, let's say, closer to sea level. But again, that kind of gets to my point, and we as media can be partially to blame for that, because we're always looking for that sexy headline, right? But I think in the dawn of social media, we have to also be competitive, because what I saw a lot of in this last week, as well as a meteorologist in the Midwest, was a lot of hype. And what I mean by that is, now those of you that you may not pay that much attention, but And I'm not going to call out specific people because I don't think that's fair. A lot of these people are very much weather nerds and love weather as much as you or I do. I like to think that people aren't doing it for malicious or financial intent. Maybe some people are. But I think that people should know going in what they need, what really goes into that kind of a forecast. And so what triggered this was, one, there was two instances. Not just the Hawaiian thing, but then on top of that, I had some time off last week, so I'm just kind of just bored and flipping through TikTok and Facebook. TikTok actually has a young person there that he does a good job of explaining stuff, but what he does is he kind of, TikToks are short videos, right? So you can't have a lot of context in there. And eventually, he starts talking about short term. Well, we've got this and much colder air and blah, blah, blah. And so he's kind of started talking about the forecast, for the Midwest, where, chances of rain, some severe weather potentially down south that we had on Monday, followed by gusty winds and much colder temperatures, which eventually did happen. So that was the short term. And then he kind of talked about maybe, the pattern kind of turning active, but then he shows at the very end, we might be talking about this in 2 weeks. And he showed a raw forecast from a particular model. I don't remember which one it was, of how much snow a large section of the country could see. And some of the numbers were outrageous. And I'll get into that. But he's not alone, because I can go on Facebook and I can see some of my friends that are on Facebook sharing some social media profiles that are sharing raw models and raw model data that for a storm system that doesn't even exist yet. It's forecasting 2 weeks in advance. Okay. So you got to think logically here, but the problem is the public does not think logically like meteorologists would when it comes to weather. Okay? When you're in social media mode and you're looking for information, your brain's going to go, oh my gosh, right? This person just posted a map that says 25 inches of snow. You got to think, though, you got to put it all into context, record-breaking snows. That would be a record-breaking snow. In fact, it would be a shattering record-breaking snow if we picked up that kind of amount in Indianapolis. So, first of all, when you see that kind of stuff, you have to take that with a grain of salt. Could we have one? Sure. What are the odds? Extremely low. I do think, and I will give credit to many of these people that will post those kind of models, that they may actually write in context, hey, this is not a forecast, there will be things that will likely change. The problem that I have with that is, and I have found this through my own mistakes in doing the same thing, because look, I get excited about that kind of stuff. I'm a weather geek. I love being able to forecast unique weather events, right? And so, yeah, you want to hype it up and all that other stuff. But I learned very quickly how much you have to backpedal when you do something like that. If you're posting a snowfall accumulation map 9, 10, 11 plus days out, there is going to be so many things that change between now and then. And while I thought I was doing my due diligence, like by saying, hey, gang, just an FYI, this is not a forecast. This is just to show you what possibly could happen if we start seeing things trend this way. That was when I was young and dumb. Now I'm old and dumb, but I like to think that I've learned some lessons along the way when it came to things like that. The problem that I have is that some people are not learning those lessons. And I will be honest with you. Like I said, I don't think people are always doing it maliciously, but I know that, again, it goes back to what I said about why news organizations don't always paint the picture in the headline, because they want to have that sexy headline to get you to click. And people that want to grow their social media pages are going to do. And this is the sad reality and truth. If I were to post a snowfall forecast for, say a random Tuesday night where we're going to get a little brief clipper, I may get like a handful of likes. I may get maybe 5 to 10 comments. I might get, 3 or 4 shares. Okay. Whereas if I were to post that one of the models was showing we were going to get 15 inches of snow the week before Christmas, guarantee you that's going to get a gazillion likes. It's going to get a gazillion shares, and it's going to get a lot of comments. Now, there will be a lot of people that will comment and say, oh, I'll believe it when I see it, or that's irresponsible, or whatever. But, we live in a society now that even bad feedback is feedback. And the algorithm that Facebook has for you is, even if people are commenting like crazy, you're going to be much more visible. And so people know this. People know the game. And so that's where you get a lot of these kind of shares and all that other stuff. And so the visibility goes up because that's what people want to see. They want to see the craziness, right, of what can happen. It makes the job difficult, though, because unfortunately, I'd say all of us as a weather community get tied in together. And that's not just broadcasters, that's National Weather Service. That's the private sector outside of broadcast. We get tied into the nonsense. And while Joe Blow over there is posting 2 weeks out, and it's some guy that lives in Oklahoma and has no real knowledge of forecasting in the Midwest or in Indiana for that matter. While he posted that, it is, he forgot about it. When the actual event was supposed to happen, he's moved on because he got his likes and he got his shares when he needed them, right? And so now a bunch more people are following his page. And they just say, hey, he got it wrong, but then you get the next big one and people just kind of pile on. It's actually very fascinating. Usually if you get burned over and over and over and over again, people are going to stop flocking to that. But weather is a unique thing because, look, I'll be the first to admit I have on this podcast. And I sit there and I say, hey, I'm not all high and mighty when it comes to, these forecasts being wrong. I certainly don't get it right all the time either. But I do like to take a little bit more caution in that. And I also like to be more open. And when I don't know, I'll admit that, hey, I do not know. I've always been of the philosophy, as I've gotten older especially, that I don't post any snowfall maps at least 3 days out. There's no point. Why am I going to sit and want to change this a million times? I think when you can start off with a base and say, look, these are the areas I think that are going to have a higher impact on a, let's say for Indiana purposes, on a Midwest perspective. And then you just kind of fine tune that as you get deeper into that forecast to where you can actually get into snowfall amounts and that kind of thing. That's, I think, has been a little bit better for me personally as a forecaster. But again, I have to compete with I haven't had it so much this season yet. But there are often times where we're a week plus out and I'll be like, hey, I'm hearing buzz about this, and this. And you have to say, look, a lot of the times when you're doing, you have to keep in mind, and I think I've brought this up several times before, but you have to keep in mind that 2 weeks from now, this system that the models are generating hasn't even formed yet, does not exist. And therefore, there's no actual current data going into those projected models. And so many things can change and often do. Even if you're getting some sort of consistency between several model runs, whether it be the European and the GFS, or you're throwing the Canadian in there as well, you're just not getting that consistency of you're not getting that information, I should say, from what's currently happening, because it's like I said earlier, and James Spann, I love how he says it's the land of voodoo, right? There's no skill in that. There's no skill in somebody going online and just posting raw model data and say, hey, this is what the GFS is saying 2 weeks from now. I always find it interesting that a majority of those pages, and this is where you should always take caution. If you are a big weather nut, but you're not sure on who to follow, if you're following a page and they post a big snowfall map and say, hey, 2 weeks from now, this is what the GFS is saying, or they could say, this is what the European model is saying. Have them show the other model. Ask them to show the other model. A lot of times, 2 weeks, you're not going to get any consistency. You're not going to get two models saying, oh, yeah, we're going to get 15 inches of snow. That kind of consistency usually doesn't happen. One model is going to have it, another model probably won't. And I always find it fascinating that these pages don't necessarily always show the best case scenario. They always want to show the worst. Or another example, I've mentioned before that we get 4 runs a day, 0Z, 6Z, 12Z, 18Z for both the European and the GFS. One of the models may say in 9 or 10 days that we could have a big snow. Let's say, for example, it's the 12Z European. But then the 0Z European the following day shows nothing. Well, the social media account doesn't post that kind of stuff. They show the big one, but then they don't have a follow-up and saying, oh, the 0Z just actually got rid of the storm. So that's where you need to take caution, okay? And I'm not saying this to blast social media. There's so many good things that can happen with there's a lot of bad things, but there's so many good things that can happen with social media when it comes to informing the public, when it comes to weather. But I think we've gotten into this habit now. Everybody wants to have all the likes, all the shares, all the comments. They want more visibility, which then in turns to more followers. So, there is an issue that I have with that, and it's not jealousy, because I can tell you right now, I don't care if I have 10 followers or if I have 10 million followers on Facebook, I'm still making the same amount of money. My goal is to inform the public of what I know in terms of forecasts. It's not always going to be right. Never said that it would. But I do want to at least be open and honest with my process in terms of forecasting and where I stand. So that's kind of my rant. And so the theme of this is just be aware before you share. I know the Weather Service is so good about turn around, don't drown, and all that other stuff. But I'm serious. Be aware before you share. If it seems kind of fishy, don't share it. If you've got questions, ask. If they start getting kind of huffy puffy and stuff like that, then, you should question that. There's many times where I will post a snowfall map and I'm honest about it, because I'll say, here's my map. And somebody will jump on my page and say, well, Channel 6 has more, or Channel 59 has more, or this Facebook page has more, and they've been saying it for weeks. And I'm like, that's their forecast. This is mine, And if they ask, well, where did you get that? Then I'll walk through an explanation, because I think we all see things a little bit differently. But I will always give you an explanation. I won't just say just because. I will give you an explanation on why I think that, but I make sure that I have a pretty good confidence of my forecast and why I can't explain it. I can bet you money that if somebody posts a 2-week out snowfall map and said, hey, this could happen, and you ask them, say, well, what's your forecasting explanation for that? If it is, more often than not, it's more likely to be, well, that's just what the model's saying. Well, the models are nothing more than that. It's the other term that we use in meteorology. Models are guidance, and they're really not supposed to be anything more than that. It's just guidance. They're supposed to assist us in forecast, not actually be the forecast, because there's so many other mitigating factors in it. So I know I went on how long? Almost a half-hour rant. I'm sorry. But I also think it's that time of year where we do need to be aware of that, because we can get a lot of social media hype. You know, it seems like over the last few years, we haven't had those big snows. We got one last year. It always seems like it's the nuisance snows that you know, the ones that end up really, really big in the beginning in terms of model projection that a lot of you shouldn't be seeing. You know, I mean, we really shouldn't be posting those out there. It's a little bit behind the curtain, inside baseball stuff. You know, if there were some things to worry about, I think that our wording would become a little bit more strong. And I try to follow that guideline. Case in point, February, when we had the big snow here, when we all were kind of in the double digits in terms of snowfall in inches, you know, our wording got stronger and stronger each day as we felt more confident that this was likely going to be a big system. Now, some other outlets may say, well, we were on it for 2 weeks. Well, you can make that argument. I would make the argument that every once in a while you are going to get lucky, and one of those models is probably going to hold true that a big snow is going to come. But if I do remember correctly, a lot of those models were projecting 20-some plus inches of snowfall in one sitting period, and I think the highest total we had was like 15 or 16 inches of snow. Not discrediting how big of a snow it was. It certainly was. But it was also 10 inches lower than what some of the projections that were posted on social media initially were. So, again, that's just kind of, again, me on my soapbox a little bit. I'd love to hear your feedback. Some of you may disagree with me, and that's totally fine. And I'd love to have a civil discussion with you about it if you'd like. Social media has definitely changed how we play the game a little bit. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes we get in this mode of being first. You know, we see it in news all the time. How many times in news, and I can be critical a little bit because I'm an outsider when it comes to news, how many times in news have we seen, you know, that news organizations will jump on a story and then they have to retract a statement because they jumped the gun too early? We've seen it so many times, in elections, but I mean in other things too. You know, but I don't think weather's any different. We always seem like we want to be the first to get it out. I got to be that first to throw out this crazy amount of GFS snowfall that's getting posted out. And that's just not how weather works, right? You want to try to be as accurate as you can. And even furthermore, and I mentioned this, you know, a few podcasts ago, that, you know, I think we really need to make a shift in the weather community. And that's not just broadcast, but that's social media, that's government, National Weather Service, that's private sector outside of broadcast, of being more forceful in how it's going to impact you. You know, what does, you know, 12 inches of snow mean on a midnight on a Saturday morning mean to you compared to 4 inches of snow in the middle of rush hour while you're trying to drive to work on a Wednesday morning? Which one's going to have more impact? You know, and so we all get hung up on the numbers, and that is a fun part of it, and you want to be accurate. And it can make a difference, right? But are you really going to know the difference between 8 inches of snow and 10 inches of snow? Is it going to make your life any less or more difficult? You know, if we're off on that much or whatever like that. So I'd like to see us shift more as a community to more impact. And I think that's when you can kind of be a little bit earlier than what we do in terms of accumulating snow and be like, look, yeah, there might be some timing issues, but this is what we're focusing on. We get so hung up on the numbers and we feel like we have to put those numbers out as soon as we can. But I think the driving point is, look, I think the morning commute's going to be awful. I think the evening commute could be bad as well. I think the following morning commute's going to be in better shape. You know, when you start kind of driving those kind of points home and we start kind of getting the public more used to that, then maybe a lot of the social media hype goes away a little bit. But we all have to kind of collectively make that turn a little bit. You know, I think there's still very much a benefit to posting accumulation maps. It is very much a skill, and it's very much, I think, needed. But I think we, as a society, when it comes to forecasting, maybe lean a little bit too heavily on that. So that's just my 2 cents. Again, you may agree or disagree, and I always appreciate your opinion, and you feel free to send it my way. We'll have that forecast, full week of December. That forecast coming up next year on Weather Weekly. All right, here's a look at your forecast for this first full week of December. Again, this is for the week of December 6th, 2021. And yeah, we felt that dose of winter and had some snow that we had to deal with as well. Now in the back half of this week, I'll tell you what, pretty interesting. As cold as it got Monday night, heading into Tuesday, we rebound in a big way. Heading into your Thursday, I think we return to numbers back into the 40s. We likely make a run close to 60 degrees by Friday. That's going to be ahead of a cold front. Now, typically, kind of like what we just had this past weekend and leading into Monday, it's going to come with some pretty gusty winds. So it's not all just fun and games where it's going to be extremely mild. It's going to be a bit on the windy side ahead of this cold front that's going to be moving on through. And then we'll see those numbers kind of falling back. Low 50s we head into Saturday, and that's going to come with some rain. And then we fall back to the lower 40s on Sunday on the back end of the cold front. So we'll have a kind of significant cool down again as we start rolling through the back half of the weekend. But I'll tell you what, the 8 to 14 day outlook, above average. And I'm not talking like a minimal chance for it. This is strong signaling here that we're going to be talking about well above average temperatures for much of the Midwest, really the central part of the country, the Midwest, and the East Coast. All with a very strong signal of above average temperatures with near normal precipitation. That will take us into that week before Christmas, the 13th through the 19th. So it could be a very mild stretch. And so now we're starting to get to that period where people are asking, hey, we're going to get a white Christmas. Now we will have some days, possibly. I think it's worth to note that historically speaking, we get about a 30 to 40% chance for a white Christmas in the state of Indiana. AccuWeather posted, for what it's worth, AccuWeather posted its white Christmas forecast, and it has us near normal in terms of the percentage of that. So maybe a 30 to 40% shot. It's not great. But we may have that possibility. You'd either, and that is not necessarily snowing on Christmas, but that you have an inch of snow on the ground by Christmas Day, which would make for a white Christmas. So we'll see. We're still a little far out to have any certainty there. It's still early December and we have a few weeks. We'll iron that out as we get a little bit closer. Thank you so much for spending your last few minutes with me here on Weather Weekly. Always appreciate your time. And again, quick note. Hoping to have Mike Ryan on, meteorologist from the National Weather Service, with his annual winter forecast for this 2021-2022 winter season. He's already had it released, but we'll be able to have him on and ask him some questions, and he could be able to dive in deep on exactly what he thinks will happen here over the next 3+ months as we gear up during the winter season. So we'll hopefully have you join us for that. Should be a really good one, very interesting one as we head into a La Nina season. Always appreciate your time. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can email me anytime, marcus.bailey@wishtv.com. You can also reach out on social media at Marcus Bailey Weather, or that's on Facebook, and then on Twitter and Instagram, it's at Marcus Bailey. Now, we went through a lot here. I kind of went on a little bit of a rant social media-wide. It certainly was not to ruffle feathers or anything like that. But we're all in the same kind of game together a little bit, and that is to inform the public of impending weather dangers. And so we don't like to hype things up or anything like that. And so just want to get the nuts and bolts out and just kind of give you at least my 2 cents. I know for what it's worth, there's probably some definitely more interesting opinions out there, but that's kind of what I'm thinking in my 15 years experience of television broadcasting. So there you go. But we'd love to hear your feedback, so shoot me an email or hit me up on social media anytime. While you're here, make sure to check out all the other great podcasts, all part of the All Indiana Podcast Network. We'll talk to you next week.
Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com, and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.